And we're live. What an exciting rush to start the morning. So we've just had an absolute tech meltdown on our end and still managed to kick this broadcast off at 9:02 a.m. So that is not a good one.
You did. You are professional. Breakfast time.
Very professional. Minor panic. So what I was thinking this morning, Max, was actually how disappointed I am that it's the morning here in New Zealand and that I've got a writing day ahead, which means that we can't be having a drink. Because what I enjoyed about our post-live chat last week was you telling me about the excellent events you hold where you get together with your clients and you all like have a few drinks. And I was thinking it might be quite nice for us to have a pub session, and then thought, well, 9 a.m. on a Thursday is probably not totally flash here in New Zealand for a pub session.
Don't allow yourself to be alcohol shamed, Alicia. If you want a drink, you have a drink.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, shoot up anything you want.
Actually, funny story. I remembered about this last night. I was doing a speaking gig in Melbourne, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 months ago, and I was speaking to a public sector crowd.
In the olden days.
I made a joke about junkies. And so everybody was laughing along with me and buying in. You know, when you know that a crowd's into you, and I'd cracked a few funnies and everybody was keen and it was going really well. And then I said something, you know, like something about, I can't remember the joke now, about a junkie looking for a fix, and the whole room went dead. And I saw everyone's faces and just went, wrong crowd, don't make junkie jokes again.
Yeah.
So don't do that anymore.
And all that.
Anyway, it's very exciting to have you here again this morning. And what's nice for everybody who's joining us, hello, LinkedIn, is that there is absolutely no filter or preparation in this, and they can be assured that it's 100% authentic thanks to the beauty of technology. So that's very exciting.
I like the idea. Absolutely no preparation. Yeah, we haven't even thought. Yeah, but let's go.
I tell you what I have been thinking about this week and that I wanted to talk to you about, because I can't remember the name of this specific cognitive bias, but you know how we have this tendency to be baffled by how nobody else thinks the thing we know about is as important as we think it is?
Yeah.
And this has come up over the last few days a few times in my life. And I was thinking about it this morning. I thought what I want to talk to Max about is about how we just don't teach people to think about things. Why don't we teach people to think about things? It's such a basic skill. And then immediately found myself self-censoring, going, maybe I only care about that because I know about it.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
Well, the bias you were looking for was the false consensus bias. So
false consensus bias. I knew you would have that ready to pull out of the bag. Thank you.
We need sound effects in the back, you know, if I get one right. So the false consensus bias, the idea that we assume that other people agree with us because what we say and think seems pretty reasonable to us, right? Surely most people...
I don't know if that is the right bias. I think it's another one. We might have to consult the cognitive bias dictionary. I reckon it's another one. It's a specific brand of placing more value on the subject matter that you are knowledgeable about, simply because you're knowledgeable about it. It's like a cross between the false consensus and the familiarity bias or something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a form of self-serving bias as well, potentially.
Yeah. Like I've had a few meetings, a few strategy meetings with leadership teams this week where I just noticed this theme of people going, and just nobody else gets it, you know, like we're all digital now, or we're all infrastructure planning, or this is all about data right now. Why isn't everybody on the same page? And I'm going, well, because they don't know and they think their stuff is more important, because to them it is.
Yeah, and of course it is. I mean, that's part of the challenge generally, is that it's more effort to think about other people. You could say there are a few nice psychological findings in here. One is obviously that this general idea that thinking is effort. So the more you have to think an original thought or a novel thought, the more effort that is. So sometimes we see that in fast thinking, slow thinking, system 1, system 2, but it's a lot more complicated than that and a lot simpler. The basic thing is that the newer it is, the more involved it is, the more energy it takes, and the more likely we are to say, let's just put that to one side because it's just not worth the effort. And the worst thing,
because as my friend Digby Scott likes to say, our brains are lazy, right? Like it'll take the easiest path if it can.
So, particularly some brains. This idea that we've all got the
Well,
same
some people.
brain. So some people, those people.
My marvelous friend.
Some brains are lazier, and some brains are different, and some brains are not just different; they're kind of better. I mean, in the sense of one person has got more working memory than the next person, so they can stack all those ideas up in their head and think about them. And another person has better memory for that thing than the other thing. So in a way, of course, we see things differently because we're not the same thing.
My marvelous friend Shane Hatton, who I spoke to yesterday, hi Shane, if you're on the live, was using this metaphor. You know how everybody's talking about, you know, we've had to switch off autopilot since we've been in this new environment where everything takes effort, you know, so we've had to engage that part of our brain. And then he was just extending this metaphor well beyond where it usually sits, that I was having a great time with. It's like, and now we've had to take control. You know, we've got the controls and we've got to use all of them, but there's kids and pets in the cockpit. And I thought that was such a brilliant way to describe this madness that we've been in.
Yeah, and some people, I think, as you pointed out last time, are finding themselves in it. It actually suits them, because in part because they were good at juggling. But all of us have been able to put some things to one side, and depending on how kind of committed we were to the way things used to be, that's quite nice to put a few things down. I mean, it depends. I was talking to a guy from New Zealand yesterday, I think, and he retired because he didn't want to, he was a professor, he didn't want to do this new online thing. So he retired rather than press his brain into action and learn a new thing.
How good is that? Like, now,
whoa, why would you do that?
This is what it is. I'm out. I'm done. This is me.
Yeah. Yours is not the only opinion in the room. It is a difficult thing for people to think through, and it leads people to interesting responses. Sometimes they say, well, people don't think like me. It's a lot of effort to make people think like me. You know what? I'll sign out. I won't even bother trying to change people's opinion, or I'll get to the top. Because you get to the top and then you don't have to ask people's opinion, potentially. Or you just say, well, I'll just grumble the rest of my life instead, because it's more effort than changing another person's mind. I mean, changing another person's mind is effort. And in a way, you have to respect the mind. You say, you know, Alicia, I like you, you like me, but we've got a difference of opinion here. Instead of letting it go, I'm going to take the kind of effort involved to turn your opinion around or understand your view and then move to it. And now, which one sounds like most effort? It's fun.
Yeah, that sounds exhausting.
But exhausting, and that's just one change of mind.
Okay, but if you take it that, all right, we've all got different, we're starting with different models, right? We've all got laptops of different models. You can't just put a new stick of RAM in to improve our working memory. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, look at that. It's the computer analogy. Hello, nerds on the call. Have I captured your interest? No. But if you assume that we're all starting from a different basis, but that we do have some choice about, oh, hang on, I've got a metaphor developing. If we do have some choice about what operating system we decide to use or the software that we plug in, right? Why is it that the way we think or how we think isn't part of the core curriculum of being a person? Because I feel like some of those skills, and again, I'm applying my own bias here, but some of those skills around just approaching a problem from different angles or critical thinking or judgment or decision making feel to me like quite core human skills. And I'm a little bit baffled as to why we don't teach how to think and why that becomes something that only really pops up as a challenge once we've started to rise to the top, as you put it.
Yeah, I think the how to think thing has varied over time. Like, it sounds like a really great idea. And there are people over time who've cared about teaching critical thinking at school, philosophy at school, psychology at school, most followed course apparently now. So people are interested in it, but which version? Even when you're being taught kind of citizenship at school or religion at school. You know, I'm not religious, but really those people who want to teach that at school are saying, look, how you think about stuff is worth sharing, but which version? And we're busy
Oh,
teaching
yeah,
people
you're
how
right.
to actually speak and write and not to, spit and, toilet training. There's quite a lot of human stuff that we get to before the higher level stuff. And maybe that's part of it. Although an increasing generation, I know of schools in the UK are teaching resilience, for instance. And that's a form of how do you think? You come across a challenge, what are you going to do about it? So I think we'll see more of that, but it still depends on which version.
Yeah, because the versions that you've alluded to there, where we're thinking about things like religion or I forget the second example you used, of philosophy, less philosophy but more religion, often have content or values embedded in them, right? So cultural norms or the accepted way of thinking about something or what you should think. And I think something that I find interesting is that there are skills that we treat as intuitive or hardwired, and we seem to think that if you're a good decision maker or you've got good judgment, that those things are something that you either have or you don't,
Yeah.
Like it's similar to the way that we view art and creativity. Either you're creative or you're not. When really, like art or like music, thinking and strategy is something that actually there are patterns and rules that are content agnostic, and using a process or a framework makes it possible to get the answer regardless of what your values and norms are going in. And so those steps and how do you think about things, how do you gather information, how do you make sense of context, how do you evaluate options, I feel like that is something that we should be treating as a skill or a pattern or a series of rules, rather than some kind of magical you have it or you don't, great leaders are born type thing.
Yeah. I mean, the closest you get in school in a way is teaching science, possibly, when you are teaching somebody an approach to assess it like this, set up an experiment, and then you might get something. And then, of course, thinking patterns, scripts are passed on by our parents and our teachers. And there'll be somebody listening to this who went to the house of a friend, and they liked the way that family was. And they looked at how they were making decisions and they said, that's what I want, I'll copy that. I don't just mean money, I just mean a way of living. And they adopted that way of thinking. So we're always copying.
Isn't it transformative the first time you go to someone's house as a child and you realize that not everybody does things like your family, and you go, oh, there's other ways of being a family. Other people eat this stuff and live like this. I didn't even know you could do that.
Yeah, completely. I mean, we benefit from being able to at least see things now, TV, video, internet, and you might have some exposure. But in the day-to-day, the idea that this could be otherwise. I mean, some brains are always popping. They're imagining it before it has ever happened in the real world, sci-fi people, which is quite remarkable, really. I'm sat here, things aren't the way, but I'm going to invent a car. I'll do it. But completely. But you really raise an interesting point too, which is even after we're adults and even after we say run an enterprise and even after we're a leader or an entrepreneur and we're responsible for people, how little time is spent and invested in improving people's thinking, their strategic thinking ability. That I find curious. I'm
curious about it too, because it's something that it is an activity, but it's an activity that we don't treat in the same way as other activities, which we diarise or prioritise or plan for or have a strategy for where we're going to fit it in and how it creates. It's not in our roles and responsibilities as a task that we tick off. No. Did I think today? In the same way that we do for detail work or systems work or people work. So I think over the last few decades, we've definitely shifted to understanding that time with people is a valuable, bookable activity. But I still see a real reluctance, unless it is in the formalised institution of a strategy workshop, to have people going, right, and this is my thinking time. So, Friday from 9 till 12, that's what's in my diary. And it's a completely different attitude to thinking about thinking as not being this organic magic thing that happens, but actually something you've got to make space for and learn to do.
Yeah, so one, taking time for strategy, two, viewing strategy as a thing you can improve upon. I think those two. But if you might have studied, say, total quality. Deming, an American, came up with the idea that if you involve people more all the way through the organization, even at the factory floor, you can build quality because you build quality into the brains of the people who work there. You know, proper statistical analysis stuff, really sophisticated. And you would not be surprised to find totally ignored by the Americans, and then by accident is totally grabbed by the Japanese. The thing I was...
Okay, this is such a good segue to a question that we've got here from Glenn, which is, to what degree should stakeholders be involved in strategy development? So how should we be bringing people in to that process? And how should we be creating opportunities for people outside of our own head to have an input into the way that we think? Do you have any views on that one, Max?
Completely. I guess this is the idea of, at the top end, the open strategy is the most extreme version of this. An open strategy, if Glenn clearly is listening to me, so if we have closed strategy on one side and open strategy on the other, closed strategy is saying only the leaders get a say, and probably only the chief leader gets a say in the direction. And open strategy is saying, well, why not involve everybody who is affected by this? And that can include customers, that can include the people who actually do the work, which I rather like. And the truth is that the open strategy version works very, very well, as long as you keep checking whether it's working well, Glenn.
Yeah, and as long as there's clarity about what role everybody gets to play. So something that I find interesting, particularly working in the public sector, is, are you familiar with the IAP2 model of public participation engagement model?
Yeah, I bet it's not the same as the one in your book, though.
So there's a spectrum, right, of, okay, so we can all the way from informing people through to empowering people into what their involvement is in a decision process. And I think what's really challenging about that, if we think about that open strategy lens, is there seems to be an assumption that empowering people right down the other end is the goal, or it's better, or it's better than just informing them. And where that becomes a challenge, particularly for teams that I see trying to engage with others, is they then become disingenuous because they present it as an opportunity for empowerment, when really it could be just an opportunity for consulting or informing. And I think what I see done worst in collaborative strategy processes is that lack of clarity about who gets what bit. So who's the decision maker, where is your input, and how will it be used? What is your role in this decision?
Yeah, I mean, what you particularly are pointing out there is the difference between effective and ineffective, and then also shallow, deep. Yeah. So if Glenn was listening, if you imagined a cube, you cube it up and you say open, closed, but then effective, less effective, and then shallow and deep. And you can imagine that if somebody goes for, I really want open strategy, but actually it's shallow open strategy, I'm just going to ask Glenn and Alicia what they think and send you a form and put you in a meeting, but actually not really listen and not really inform you and not make you smarter so that you can be more strategic as part of your job. Well, what was the point? And then you say equals ineffective. So we tried all of this box ticking exercise. It didn't work because we did it in a shallow way. We didn't adapt. Therefore, why did we bother doing it in the first place? The conclusion cannot be that open strategy is a bad idea, simply that you did open strategy badly.
Totally. So that's that how do we do it well stuff. And I think one of the key elements of any good decision-making process, Glenn, is that you've got a full diversity of affected views represented. And that doesn't need to mean that everybody who works in a particular organisation or every stakeholder needs to be part of the thinking process. But it does mean that there needs to be representation of those interests and views. And so that's about that. Step outside your comfort zone a bit and orchestrate a bit of conflict. So get people with opposing views in the room, make sure that you've got a full spread of ideas. And it doesn't, like, it's a quality thing, not a quantity thing. What I want to be really careful of saying there, though, is, so my early career was very local government focused. And I've worked with sorry everyone, but I've worked with a lot of exclusively white dudes over 50 telling me that they don't need actual diversity in the room because they've got diversity of opinion and thinking that they've got the full spread, and they just don't. And so diversity of views requires actual diversity of people involved, but it doesn't, I don't think, need everybody quantity-wise involved.
Yeah, again, to me, it's always the equal sign. So the old Churchill quote that however beautiful your strategy, you should occasionally check results. This is about strategic adaptability. So right at the highest level, you're only asking 5 questions to equal better than you've got at the moment. I mean, this part of the challenging thing, I would start with the small myself as a strategist and get better at it. And then I would extend it to my team if I have a team, rather than try to do the whole organization just as a box ticking exercise. But at the same time, if you are the CEO, if you have got a lot of people you're responsible for, you should go beyond something like, Gallup 12, the questions. Gallup 12 is an employee engagement system, and not one of the questions that they ask involve the person having an opinion on the direction of their own organization and how to contribute. And yet the most sophisticated organizations, the most effective, are those that try to build a bigger brain from their people. You've got all these amazing things, smarter than your computers, walking around, seeing things, thinking things, wrap them into the business like a brain, not like a body. Henry Ford was all about the body. He didn't want people to think. He wanted people to obey. I think we've got a long, long way past that. And the organizations that get the most out of the brains that are walking around are the ones who are doing best.
Totally. And if have you read Homo Deus?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's this whole theory of going, hey, if the only value we place on people is manual labor, well, we don't really need people anymore. We should disestablish the public health system because we're only keeping them alive so we could use them. And if we don't need their bodies now, well, what do we need them for?
It is
I love that thinking.
Yeah, it is an extreme view, of course. I mean, because even if those people couldn't do anything, are they not valuable? I mean, I think, do they have to? They don't just have to have economic value. There's more to it than that. And I think that
hold on. There's more to people than their economic value. This is getting very radical, Max.
But don't you love that global warming thing where they go, this is how much it might cost if we ruin the planet? You go, what? At WTF, we live on this planet.
Oh, before we answer Robin's question, actually, it's worth pointing out that in a side chat that I had with Max via text last week, he introduced me to a new acronym. So I don't know if other people in New Zealand are familiar with this acronym, but I'm always excited to get a new one. And so I said, hey, do you want to do this for the next few weeks? Because the first chat went really well. And Max said, yeah, WTFN. Is anybody, before we answer Robin's question, does anybody in the chat know what WTFN stands for? Because this was totally new to me. There's a couple of minutes lag there, so I'll move ahead with explaining it. But could you tell us, Max, what does WTFN stand for?
By the way, before we do that, another bias to throw in is hindsight bias, which means that after I tell everybody, 75% of them will think they already knew it. Yeah. Plus, it is a cool skill in the political strategy sphere, which is always to pause and say, tell me that again. And then just go, oh, yeah. Of course I knew that. So my very clever daughter has done that to me for years.
Yes, so, my 10-year-old daughter always asks a question and then immediately responds with, yeah, I know.
Yeah, and you go, know what? Did you? Were you listening? So in answer to the question you said, WTFN is why the not? Why the fuck not?
Oh, Yvonne's already spotted it in the chat. I wonder if she's a Kiwi. Yeah, why the fuck not? Can you say fuck on LinkedIn?
Or wonder if she's read my books. So what you have is the idea of WTF, what the fuck, things happen to you. You don't plan those. And then the WTFN, though, is the question that you ask. It's internal, and that's what drives the innovator to say, well, I couldn't I? I'm in Paris. I can't get a limousine. Why don't I build an app? I could call it Uber and I'll build it. You know, that's an entirely different thought process. Yeah, and then
that is so good.
Whereas a lot of us have a stack of reasons why not.
Other new language that I picked up this week, my 5-year-old daughter started in-person school properly this week. So she started school online during lockdown, but she started in-person school this week, which is exciting. Nice. And the first lesson that they got in the classroom was about the moist breath zone. And it was my first encounter with the idea of a moist breath zone. And I enjoyed that very much and made eye contact with the teacher and giggled like a small child because I thought it was very funny. All right, we've got a question from Robin.
Robin's question. Has she got one?
Any thoughts on managing those that play the blame game rather than focus on the now and future? So that's the people are stupid rather than things are hard approach. Any thoughts on that one?
Well, I suppose, first of all, that everybody's playing games all the time. So I think what's important is if you are capable of asking that question, Robin, then you're capable of taking a step back and saying, why do people play political games? What's the political game mean? Do you mean that they always are looking for somebody to blame, or that they're defending themselves, or that they're trying to look good, or that they don't understand what you're saying? That you can become the strategist. I try to teach people that if you can notice something like that, then take the next step. That's a sophisticated move, Robin, but step out and then say, what's going on here? What are they trying to do? And then attempt to read them and go away and learn more about it. The other one is that you can, if you're only going to meetings and that's where that is happening to you, start playing the game outside of the meeting, where the game is possibly being won and lost. So it's often that people are only playing the game in the obvious way, and they think that that's where it's happening rather than playing it in all the other places. And then you'd kind of win more often, even if winning.
I love that, Max. I read something the other day about how every meeting is actually 4 meetings. And the first meeting is the meeting before the meeting, the side chat that you have before you come in. The second meeting is the one that you do where you show up and look at each other and talk. The third one is the meeting that's happening inside your head, all the things you're thinking. And the fourth meeting is the side chat on the way to the elevator, or the text afterwards, or the drink that you have when the meeting's finished. And that the goal of a good meeting is just try and squash those 4 into one.
Yeah, and as a strategic player, you get to do that. You know, as a less strategic player, you do what seems obvious. You kind of remember what your parents did, and you remember what your boss did, and you kind of remember a bit of best practice maybe, and that's your bag. But the more sophisticated player uses theory of mind and says, but what's Alicia thinking? And what's that guy she's doing a podcast with thinking? And where are her children in the background? And where's her mind really? And what could Robin be thinking? And where's her position?
And is she really drinking at 9 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah, should she more?
Should she be drinking? And I think actually, Robin, the questions that we ask to understand people are exactly the same as the questions that we ask to understand ideas. And it's taking those same concepts and bringing them up. So asking those really basic questions of, but why? Oh, this person's an asshole. Oh, yeah, but why? Oh, well, because, right? And it's the but why and the so what, which are our 2 big strategy questions.
And in what way, if that's your conclusion, so you do write it down. And again, you say the 5 questions. Where am I with this person? Where do I want to go with this person? What am I going to do and how am I going to do it in order to get there? And that's the strategic player. You know, if you wonder why some people get more of what you want, then it's either luck or it's strategy.
It's either luck or it's strategy. If you're really lucky, it's both.
Yeah, the lucky strategist who gets luckier and luckier, you know, with each iteration. I mean, I should, since we're probably nearing our time, but the iteration is right at the heart of this. The non-strategic thinker says it's either one thing or it's another, binary. Yes, no, black, white, fail or success. The strategic thinker is always iterating. and saying, hey, we're here today, but what worked, what didn't, what could I edge towards? Am I at 90% or 10%? And that allows us to be more sophisticated in the kind of position Robin's talking about, or the one that you talked about, learning how to think better. Sum it up.
I'm feeling very sophisticated, Max, because every morning I have a meeting with myself in my journal, mostly because I don't have a lot of friends, but also because it's been lockdown. And also because it's just nice to have a conversation that, you know, you're going to enjoy. And I quite enjoy conversations with myself. Anyway, I have a meeting every morning where my meeting is writing down what happened yesterday, what went well, what didn't, what's going on today, what might turn to shit, what am I going to do to overcome that before it turns to shit. And that basic process of yesterday was this and today is that now makes me feel very sophisticated. And I appreciate that.
You need that T-shirt, don't you? I'm a sophisticated
sophisticated female character. Brain. Mate, I'm going to be fooling nobody if I try and claim to be sophisticated.
Yeah, sophisticated brain, Arrow.
I think, Robin, what I find really interesting about the being frustrated by other people thing. So one of them is that my partner and I have a meme that we use where every time you want to think, why are they doing this to me? You have to take the to me off. So rather than why are they doing this to me, it's why are they doing this? And I think what that brings to light is that when we're frustrated by the way that other people are behaving in a meeting environment or the way that they're thinking, we think that we're being the objective one and that the other people are being all tangled up in their own shit. But actually it's us responding to the way that they're behaving that's having us tangled up in our own shit as well. And so when you're going through that process of mapping who's doing what and why are they thinking that way, it's just as important to go, and why am I responding like this and what am I holding on to? Are there some assumptions or some ideas or ways of working or ways of thinking that I'm clinging to actually here and I didn't realise, but we're bouncing off against each other?
Why do I mind so much?
Yeah, what is this about? Why do I care?
And don't we find that when we've got somebody to share it with who is, I don't know, sophisticated or somebody like you, who then will say that for you, of course. You know, my mother would always say, if I complained about a teacher, she would at least, her first step would be, you know, a bit of sympathy. But then her second step would be, listen, you don't know what's happening in their life, do you? You don't know. Are they going through a divorce? Have they got a mother who's got cancer? You don't know. So just before you assume, imagine that they're going through that and then see what your strategy is. And it's not automatic, but it seems a better way of being. Yeah, nice technique.
So it's that assume positive intent thing where I often, particularly when I'm working with internal teams who are trying to drive change inside an organization, it's really quick. We're often really quick in that space to swing to the why aren't people doing this type approach. And the question that we often use is, if we assume everybody's doing their best, if we assume that everybody is doing their best, then what would we change? So rather than assuming people were being non-compliant or people were being belligerent or people were being obstructive, if we assumed everybody was doing their best, then what would we have to change? And that's how we move out of the people interaction thing and up into the systems view and go, oh, right, well, actually, maybe it's not that easy.
That's why I like ranges in particular. I mean, I really like that idea of not assuming that somebody is a bad player, to use a term, that they're acting in bad faith or that they're being lazy, not make those assumptions, theory Y, theory X. If someone wants to look it up, not assume that. But at the same time, don't assume that they are acting in good faith and that they're thinking the way that you think. Because some people are bastards, essentially, or at least in the way that they behave.
I mean, yeah, there's plenty of assholes, but I reckon I'd push back on that, Max. So I'm thinking about that book, Talking to Strangers. And I'm thinking about the idea that society works best as a system when we all have trust in each other. And, you know, sometimes that trust gets violated and sometimes our assumption about people being good is incorrect. But that actually doesn't matter because overall, the system still works best when we absorb that risk and we all still assume positive intent. So even if that rips us off sometimes, in the balance, the net effect is that we're still better off.
I think if I push back again, or build on what you're saying, I think that is true. But at the same time, and that's why Gladwell's book is quite complicated and maybe reviewed very much 1 star to 5 star, is that on the one hand, yes, trust is good. On the other, some of the examples he gives are of people who end up being murdered, raped, because they trusted somebody that they shouldn't trust. So I think it's possible, entirely possible, to have, again, a range of views that says, let me not assume I'm going to have a kind of starting point that I'll be a nice, charming person, that I'll help people, but I can also keep the thought that I need to be safe and they might be playing a game with me and maybe they're not as trustworthy as I thought. I think it's entirely possible to do both. You don't have to be a naive target in the workplace or in life just because you're a good person.
Well, that's a bit of the old scenario plan 101, isn't it? And I was thinking about that actually last week when we made the announcement that we'd shifted alert levels in New Zealand for COVID response, and about the policy decision-making process that goes into that, which is surely a bit like the drinking age, where we go, all right, well, if we go level 3 and we have a scenario where 30% of people behave as though that means level 2, then what does that do to public health outcomes? And if we go level 2 and then assume that we've got a bunch of people that potentially will then do whatever they like, well, what does that do to public health outcomes, rather than the ideal scenario of everybody complying at that level? And it's like, we shifted the drinking age to 18 here in New Zealand, 20 years ago. And part of the public discussion around that is the scenario planning of, okay, well, if we make the drinking age 18, and then if that means that it's now socially acceptable to start drinking at 14 rather than 16, what does that mean for the outcomes we're looking for? And just kind of running all of those different versions out, isn't it?
No, I like that. I like that again. But it's, so you say, what law do I want to put in place? Do I say that because somebody might vandalize the playground equipment, that we will have no playground equipment? Is that the choice? Or do we say we're going to have playground equipment, somebody might damage it, but we'll repair it, and we'll try to make it as vandal-proof as we can, but we're still going to have it and we're still going to prepare it? And that's, I don't know, maybe that's a 60-70% rule that says 60-70% people at least are really decent, good people that we can trust. Build for them, not a place in which we assume that everybody is the worst that they can possibly be. I mean, that's tabloid heaven, where you assume that any stranger is a bad person. So I think we can do both, and particularly if you're the leader. If you're the leader, it's a good opportunity to say, at the leader at any level, to say, this is my environment and I can shape this, and I can have little warnings that look after, to try to keep us safe. But for the rest, we're going to trust people. We're going to give them what they want, because if they're trustworthy enough to live here, work here, I want to work with people in a fun way.
I really like that. And I think that's a great point, actually, to kind of wrap up our chat this morning, Max, which is that actually, yeah, there's a whole bunch of uncertainty and other people are involved in every decision we make, whether it's because we've chosen to involve them as stakeholders, like Glenn's asking, or whether it's because they're part of a conversation and they're an actor that we need to navigate or scenario plan for or work around. But that actually, if we focus on the bigger picture, what's the environment that we're operating in, if we think differently about our own role and about their role and how we interact and how that all plays out, and actually, if we operate on the basis that most people are good and then make our policy or our decisions or our strategy through that lens, then things will probably turn out all right. I like it.
It's a good way of thinking. And we get more out of it. Yeah, and again, the kind of person who tunes into this is, if they're smart enough to tune in and ask the question with us, then they're smart enough to upgrade. The brain is an
I love the assumption that anybody who would like to listen to us must be smart.
I think they must be. You know, these are not. If you want simplistic, there are simplistic things that you could be listening to. Either that everything is always
like, I mean, who knows what we're really putting out there.
Well, they just probably like your furniture or something. We never ever know for sure. But I think people smart enough to tune in are smart enough to upgrade themselves. The brain is an upgradable resource.
I agree. And I think any of you that are out there listening today, I'm going to assume positive intent and assume intelligence, because I think you're all a bright bunch, especially if you came to hang out with us. I love it. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. We'll be back here next Thursday at 9 a.m. to answer your questions and riff shit about strategy and the way that we think. Thank you so much for joining me, Max.
Total pleasure.
Bye.
Well.